Hey everyone, welcome again to another Senha Segura Live. My name is David Muniz and I'm here to present the trends in the Gartner IAM Summit that happened in Grapevine, Texas in March 2023. And to tell you and introduce the IAM trends, I have here with me our Senha Segura Dream Team. I have Pablo Oserin, who is our CTO. Hey, Pablo.
Hello, David. Thank you for having me here today. Hello, everyone.
Excellent. I also have here with me Dario Athens, who is our Vice President of Sales in North America. Hey, Dario, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, David. Thank you for having me. Welcome, everyone.
Excellent. And I also have here with us UC, also called Mono. Hey, Mono,
Hey,
how are you?
I'm good. Hey, I don't think I've ever been called a part of a dream team, so thank you. And hey, everybody, I think it'll be a fun night.
Yes, you are.
Excellent. We're very excited to this conversation to talk about identity and also the trends in the IAM world. And well, the world and technology has quite changed in the past few years. Before we had perimeters and protection perimeters, we had firewalls, but now with the introduction of cloud and remote work, well, we don't have any perimeters anymore. So to ensure the security of any organization, we have now the identity. Identity is called the new foundation of security. And identity is more distributed than ever. Where the network is no longer a position advantage and data is flowing everywhere. Of course, we also have data protection laws that helps enforcing the protection of personal data. And identity is so important that according to the 2022 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, almost half of data breaches take place through those identities. They're also called privileged credentials. And now to make a quick introduction on the importance of those identities and privileged credentials, I want to ask Dario about the Boolean logic of privileged identity. And this is very interesting because he uses that as a signature on his email. And I wanna hear from you, Dario. What is this logic, and what exactly does it mean?
Yeah, well, thank you. If you look back and take a look at the need to protect privileged credentials, ask yourself, well, why do we need to protect these privileged identities and these credentials? Well, it starts with if 8 out of 10 breaches today involve stolen or weak credentials, and 9 out of 10 attacks actually target those very same credentials, and then you've got 3/4 of all passwords within the enterprises, we know that they're duplicates, right? On top of that, there are 2 to 5 times the number of privileged accounts inside of a company than people even realize. So you start to see the need here for protecting privileged identity and privileged access management. And then you factor in zero trust. How does zero trust and identity play together? Well, again, if 80% of attacks are targeting credentials, then identity is the key to preventing security breaches, right? Which leads me to this conclusion, what I like to call the Boolean logic of privileged identity. And that is, if identity is the new perimeter and elevated privilege is at the core of the kill chain, then privileged identity absolutely must be an enterprise's most protected asset.
Excellent. What do you? I want to hear also from you, Pablo and Mono. Why do you? What are other aspects that security leaders and organization leaders take into account when we talk about privileged identities and privileged access?
Well, couple things, if I may. First of all, the Verizon data breach report data that 50% of breaches are due to misuse of privileged credentials. I've actually seen numbers that are far worse. I've seen numbers like Daryl mentioned, the 70-80% are actually through privileged credential misuse. So it is really a serious issue. And the second thing, sort of a slight parallel on what Daryl was saying and what David was saying about we are living in a world without perimeters. if you were a CISO 10 years ago, you could imagine, hey, you lived in a castle. You had a nice wide moat around your castle. You had a couple crocodiles in the moat, and the enemy couldn't get to you. Well, sorry to tell you, but we actually live in a bazaar now. So everybody's inside there already. So the world has really gone different. So, and in the bazaar, it's all about the identity. Who is the guy you're talking to? How do you know the identity? How do you know that guy or that girl is allowed to do what she wants to do? So, very different world.
Yeah, and we saw that identities are so important nowadays that Gartner created an event specific to AM, splitting from the risk management that is a more generic security event to cover many disciplines, but AM is actually the main actor in the security field nowadays.
Excellent. Well, and we all talked about zero trust, and I believe that zero trust is the base, the base of this protection. And of course, zero trust. We hear a lot the term zero trust, but well, this is a lot of there's a lot of misconception about this concept, because zero trust is not the absence of trust. And we've been talking about this, I think, since last year in previous Gartner events. Zero trust is not the absence of trust, it is the absence of implicit trust. So Gartner defines zero trust as a paradigm that is focused on protecting the resources and the fact that the trust is never granted implicitly, but this trust should be continually evaluated. And we have to accept the levels of risk and trust, and we have to build this level of trust within users and devices to adapt, and also to adapt the security infrastructure accordingly to this level of trust. And I would like to bring the first data with before the first question of this session. Gartner estimates that 60% of organizations will embrace zero trust as a starting point for security by 2025. However, over half of those organizations will fail to realize the benefits. And this is quite intriguing me because, well, I've been hearing about zero trust since, well, at least 2017, when I started working with cybersecurity. But I want to bring this question to you all, and anyone is welcome to answer that first. Why do you see that organizations are failing that much in implementing zero trust? What are the challenges? What prevents the success of a zero trust implementation?
Yeah, I'm happy to go to jump in if that's okay. I think there are
Of course.
four, maybe five key challenges to successful implementation of zero trust. The first is with the rise of remote work and SaaS services, perimeter security models are no longer sufficient, right? They just don't cut it any longer. Zero trust security requires that every user and device be authenticated before accessing literally anything. But this can be very difficult because for employers and companies, because employees are working remotely and they're using SaaS services outside of an enterprise's perimeter, even outside of the security team's purview, right? Which leads me to the second point of the 4 or 5, which is the growth of business-led IT, right? So with shadow SaaS or shadow IT, employees are buying and using apps outside of the official purchasing processes and without any governance at all. So integrating these apps into a zero trust security framework can be extremely time consuming, but it could also negate any productivity or agility benefits that you are counting on. And then there's the legacy systems, right? Retrofitting legacy systems and applications with zero trust obviously can be very difficult and even impossible to do so successfully. Why do I say that? Because systems may need to be replaced, which can be very costly and time consuming. But then zero trust requires ongoing administration and maintenance in order to ensure that devices are continuously being re-verified to maintain proper security. And then I guess the fifth one would be that many companies today are if they're deploying or employing zero trust strategies, they tend to customize these strategies, which then could lead to a piecemeal approach, which obviously creates gaps that need to be addressed, making their zero trust approach or program less effective than it should be.
Yeah, I mean, really, really excellent points. And there's one that I might want to add. Especially in smaller companies, I think zero trust is still being misunderstood. It's not a product category. It's not a solution such as PAM or IAM. It's a framework, or even you could call it ideology. And you can't really go out there and say, hey, I want to buy zero trust. No, zero trust is something that it's an architecture that you build your security solutions upon. And I don't think all practitioners still quite get it. But zero trust is being kind of a thrown left, thrown right as a panacea, which is not. So there are misconceptions about it.
Yeah, and we see that many security leaders look for solutions that magically will resolve all the security issues of the company, and it's not this way. Actually, it's a framework, a culture. There are a lot of basic steps that is really that companies should do before to choose tools and solutions to address the technical stuff.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I would add to that it can be very confusing too, right? So you've got security and you've got risk personnel, and they're all they're seeking funds to invest and to implement the zero trust security model. But it could also be very confusing for the business executives. It could be confusing even for the CISO and the security team that's trying to implement zero trust, because there's marketing and very vague language about it, about what zero trust is. It's what you touched on earlier. So it makes it very difficult to translate the technical reality into the business benefits, which then leads to another challenge, which is you've got to have executive backing and support. If you don't, then the program will fail. And why do you need executive backing and support? Because it requires changes in architecture, in your culture, in your technology. So if you don't have that executive sponsorship and that backing from the top down, you're likely to fail.
Yeah, and I think the question is, I mean, if somebody is looking to kind of bolster the security posture, the question is not that much, do I need zero trust? The question is, okay, what type of security do I need? What do I need to secure my enterprise against? And then you can ask, okay, is zero trust the right approach to this? So it's kind of a secondary thing. And I think those two things are sometimes being mixed.
I think I think you have also great points here, and I also think that, well, from a vendor perspective, there's a lot of marketing see in the zero trust messaging. Lots of vendors tell that they offer zero trust, but well, it's also hard to pass this message to customers and to organizations. Another aspect that, well, Dario said about legacy systems, this is, I think, in my opinion, this is crucial because, well, it's impossible to protect what you don't know. And if you can protect legacy systems, then there's an attack surface that emerges there that can be explored from malicious actors to perform their cyber attacks. And well, just bringing now our solution, Senha Segura, it's important to mention that our open connectors allow the customers to have full visibility of the assets connected to the infrastructure, even legacy devices, because they allow the customer to integrate and to develop themselves the connectors to integrate and to onboard those privileged credentials and also those assets. Well, now that we understand those challenges, and we also understand that identity protection and identity security is part of zero trust and part of cybersecurity. And there's a good session that happened during the event that represents this identity first security as a North Star for your IAM reimplementation. And well, we can remember now that Gartner elected identity first security. It was first introduced in 2021 by Gartner, and it is among the top cybersecurity trends. And the identity-first security approach makes identity-based controls the foundation element of the whole architecture and of the whole cybersecurity architecture in a company. And we can understand that because, well, approaches like zero trust take into account the continuous authentication and verification of user identity. And I remember that we talked about this during our preparation for this session. And well, as we said before, this zero trust makes the security perimeters obsolete. And when we talk about identity protection, there's a lot of new areas coming up. We have ITDR, we have KIM, we have PAM, and many others that introduce those controls to protect identities as to be also adherent with this whole zero trust based approach. And this is something that we also have, Gartner also introduced, that it is called the identity fabric, that it is an integration of this whole identity based disciplines and areas to protect these identities. And during this session, the presenter talks about the 3C's approach to identity first security: consistent, context aware, and continuous. And now I want to understand how IAM tools can enforce those three principles.
Okay, the identity fabric concept involves creating a centralized, integrated platform to managing identity and access across all the organization, providing a common framework to managing identity and access across multiple applications, systems, and domains. Based on these three C concepts, the first one is the consistent. The consistency means that the access controls and policies must be consistent across all systems and applications within the organization. For instance, data centers, cloud, network, and infrastructure. The second C is about context aware. So using various techniques to assess the context of a user request, we can make decisions based on this context. For instance, um, how multi-factor authentication will be authenticate the user, how many authentications steps of authentication need to be done to really authenticate this user. Different authentication policies to control access to resources based on users' role, job function, location, time of the day, and other contextual factors. And even risk-based access control to associated to users' requests based in the user's behavior. So what are the common devices that this user use to access, and why this user is trying to access a more critical device right now? Things like that. And finally, the third C is about the continuous, mainly the monitoring continuous monitoring. That means that the access controls and policies must be continuously monitored to ensure that they are effective in protecting resources from unauthorized access, like real-time monitoring tools that detect security threats as soon they occur to take immediate action to mitigate them. Some threat intelligence that help an organization identify potential security threats before they occur. Um, it's also good to provide regular security audits that identify vulnerabilities in their AAM systems and take corrective actions to address. It's good to perform regular penetration tests to identify weakness in the AAM systems and take steps to address them. And finally, incident response plans to respond quickly and effectively to security incidents. I saw these three C's concepts like this.
Well said. Well said.
We've
I'm
been talking
actually,
about context word, right? Right. Oh, go ahead, Mono.
yeah, I'm kind of trying to come up with a fourth C. I mean, I think these are all fantastic, and this is exactly as Pablo described. I think you need to sort of attach the principle of least privilege into all this, because you have lots of roles that in number of contexts, but you should always make sure that the person doing whatever they do has the least has enough privileges, but also has at the same time the least possible privileges. So I'm thinking 4C could be controlled. Still, I mean, I think that kind of a principal least privilege needs to be attached to these three Cs.
I would agree with that. Give them just enough privilege to do their job, nothing more.
We've been talking about, I remember talking with you, Dario, about context and about understanding what the user is doing. And the interesting here that I find really interesting is that, well, users don't need to, well, let's say that we have a system and the user every day authenticates on the system from the same location, from the same time, from the same IP address. So, for example, why do I need to enforce MFA every time the user is logging, just to give more friction to this user, instead of just trusting the device and trusting the user? And this is exactly what zero trust does. It builds the level of trust of the user. So if I'm logging from a known device and a normal time from with a user duration, and it follows the pattern, why should I add friction to the user? And that's exactly what the context aware means, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so if you're talking about authentication as a front end to your identity security tools, I'm a big believer in continuous authentication powered by behavioral biometrics. So there's all that contextual information. So for example, it's to authenticate a user and continuously authenticate the user throughout the entire session removes a lot of friction. So the behavioral biometrics approach removes that friction that users have, because they don't have to remember a new password or a new password policy that needs to be enforced. They can literally just go about their business, logging into their systems, and based on how they type, how they move their mouse, if they're using a mobile device, think about all the compute power in a mobile device and all the contextual information that's available there, for example. So all of this works in authenticating and re-authenticating the user to protect that piece. So that's my favorite front end to any identity approach, would be the continuous authentication through behavioral biometrics.
Yeah, that makes me remember of our KDI feature, our keystroke dynamic identity feature, which allows the user, the system to detect potential malicious action from users. So what Senha Segura does, it evaluates the form that the user is typing, and then we can detect a potential malicious action coming from this session.
And the beauty of implementing a tool like that, or that kind of capability, is nobody can replicate it. So for example, I'll give you a good example. I was presenting at a banking conference in Milan, and it was with IBM and others, and there was a challenge. So I put up some crypto and said, if anybody could, and I also listed my user ID and password up on the board and said, here's the crypto. If anybody can log in using my ID and password, and it's unprotected, aside from behavioral biometrics, you're welcome to keep there was 20 grand in crypto. And nobody could do it because they couldn't replicate how I typed on the keyboard. For example, here's my cadence. It's the dwell time on keys, the flight time between keys, that kind of thing. And nobody could break that portion of the security. And it was so interesting to see everybody's reaction, because there were several hundred people there, and they were blown away that now they can reduce that user friction and the concern and the challenges that they've been having with a tool like that, and still maintain that level of security posture, that high level of security that they're looking for.
And David, to come back to your original question about why add some friction if something happens more or less the same way every time. Well, a lot of those things are maybe not easy, but possible to spoof. I mean, you can spoof MAC address, you can spoof location, etc. So that added friction, yeah, probably that can be spoofed as well. But again, makes spoofing and makes illegal unauthorized access that much more difficult. So there's a point.
Good point. We have also been talking, there's a lot of also in the market about detection and response. We've been hearing about EDR, endpoint detection response, XDR, and now we have a new discipline coming up, which is ITDR, which basically relates to identity threat detection and response. And there was also something that was well covered during the Gartner event. And well, we see that the traditional identity and access management controls are not well designed to protect organizations against threats in their identity infrastructure. We have misconfigurations, vulnerabilities, which can be exploited and then exposes the identity infrastructure. There's also social engineering. We had the Uber cyber attack last year that used MFA fatigue. So protecting the identity and the identity providers is essential to also ensure cybersecurity in the organizations. And also, something that I like to bring here is that the time that cybersecurity teams take to identify and contain a data breach, well, 277 days, according to the IBM 2022 cost of a data breach report, which leaves room for the attackers to do quite some damage in the infrastructure. And well, also we have Active Directory that is also a favorite target of those malicious attackers, because if they have access to Active Directory, well, they can do quite some damage into the organizations. How you guys how you guys see the how the threats, and how you guys see the ITDR market? I know that we have some studies about that, but I want to hear about you about detection and response in the identity infrastructure.
Yeah.
Let
So
me give you a little bit of a facetious answer first. I mean, I have a friend who used to be, or who is the CISO of a fairly large semiconductor manufacturer. Sorry about that. And he tells me that, hey, don't give me any more acronyms. I mean, me and my team, we have 180 lines, rows on an Excel sheet about different technologies, different solutions that my boss wants me to implement. I have the resources, time, and budget to do 10. So please don't give me any more acronyms. So I think this world is a little funny because we come up with more and more acronyms. So ITDR definitely important. Pablo probably can give me a much more substantive answer than I do. But again, I think we need to stick to the basics and okay, figure out what are the most important things to solve. But I mean, let's hear from the actual experts.
Yes, great point, Mono. Including Gartner said and rephrased that ITDR is not a new category of tool, but it's a more a discipline that all AM tools should have. So this continuously detection of anomalies, change in behaviors, and have all the response playbooks ready to use. It's important to be implemented in all AM systems like CM and traditional ZDRs, EGA, IGA, and PAN AM solutions. So it's not a new tool that CISOs need to buy or to acquire. but uh, a, but a new discipline, or a discipline that all the tools in the identity fabric needs to implement, and to put a process that work together in order to identify as soon as possible any identity threat and have a quickly response to this threat.
Now I want to talk. Well, we talked about identity, but now let's go to our core. What exactly we do here at Senha Segura, which is privilege access management. And well, there's a lot of projects of PEM projects that do not succeed because well, there's it's complex to implement PAM. Sometimes also we talked about the support from the executives. So, but we have to understand before moving on what drives organizations to implement PAM. Well, first of all, to protect the business from cyber attacks, to make the organizations comply with regulations like GDPR, like CCPA, depending on the country, and also to enable modern patterns like DevOps, clouds, and other initiatives. And a takeaway that we got from the event is that organizations must choose the approach of to the PAM practice that is aligned and identified with drivers and that supports the goals of the organizations. But we see that lots of PAM projects do not succeed, and this is a key advice for leaders who want to make their PAM projects succeed. What should they do? So I want to hear from you. What are the from your perspective? What recommendations would you give for a company that is looking to implement PAM and want PAM to succeed in their organization?
Well, one more driver that we forgot to mention for PAM is helping to obtain cybersecurity insurance, right? So it's quite vital for getting insurance.
Yeah, yeah. Cyber insurance, you mean, right?
Yes, cyber insurance.
Yes, yes. Lots of insurers are demanding actually organizations to implement PAM. It's a good call, Dara. Thank you.
Yeah, when talking about PAM, some recommendations for companies that are looking to implement PAM and to do so successfully. If you don't mind, I'll jump right in. I have a number of them that I think are rather important. So,
Of course.
appreciate it. So, before implementing a PAM solution, it's vital that you understand and identify what a privileged account is for your organization. And I know it sounds silly, I know it sounds rudimentary, but it really is vital to understand what your definition is within the organization, and then map out what important business functions rely on data, systems, and access. Then establish a formal policy for managing privileged credentials, accounts, passwords, etc. Ensure that default passwords and usernames are not in use, right? Make sure that they've been changed in order to prevent unauthorized access, including those hard-coded credentials that are embedded within applications. So if you've got application-to-application communication going on, you want to make sure that you've eliminated those default passwords in there as well. Managing shared accounts properly is vital. So make sure that you're implementing controls to manage these shared accounts and credentials to ensure that only authorized users have access, but also that you have the ability to attribute the true user identity to that shared account. So for instance, let's say I'm Daryl Athens and I'm a contractor and I badge into my company in the morning, and then I SU to root in order to perform my job function. With PAM, my original identity follows me. So my original identity and my original permissions continue to follow me. So going back to that least privilege, I have just the right amount of privilege to perform my job function, and it's based on my true identity. So I can't, even though root is got on the system, can do anything it wants. With PAM in place, it wouldn't be the case. And then you have to be able to monitor activity on all of the privileged accounts and detect any suspicious behavior whatsoever. And I talked about implementing least privilege, right? So applying least privilege to ensure that users have access to only those data and systems that they're supposed to perform their job. And then make sure that you establish a governance process for managing privileged access. And I touched on this earlier. ensure that all stakeholders across the organization understand the importance of PAM and that they're committed to its implementation and its success. That's where senior executive buy-in comes in as well. So those are the 7 or 8 key recommendations that I would make.
So that's a great list, Daryl. A couple additional points. First of all, I mean, think also about your machine identities, because those are increasing at a great rate, and those can be quite crucial. Then if you are in manufacturing, for instance, you're probably dealing with IoT. And there's the problem with IT leaders that you usually deal with your IT estate. The IoT estate is probably somewhere else, but that's crucially important. I mean, if somebody can actually get into your IoT system and shut down your factories, I mean, you're screwed. So those need to be also brought kind of within PAM control so that you know that your IoT and your OT, for all OT is controlled. So that's one thing. Second thing is cloud. You may think, okay, I'm cloud, but hey, I'm in Amazon. I'm in Google Cloud Platform. They have actually pretty nice PAM tools for their own estates, and actually they do. But most companies do not want to rely on just one cloud provider. So make sure that whatever PAM you have can support your multi-cloud initiatives. I think IBM did a study, 87% of companies wanted to have multi-cloud. You don't want to be stuck with just one cloud provider. And I think the last point I would like to add is don't only look at technology. Think about value. And value, I'm not talking about just the price of solution, but think about, okay, what kind of resources do I need? How much hardware do I need to deploy something? How long does it take to deploy? How long does it take to actually get my people trained? And then you can start getting an idea of, okay, what is my total cost of ownership and how do I optimize that to get a good value? So I think those are things that you need to look at.
Yeah, and how long does it take to get to that value, right?
Yeah, time to value, or actually, I've learned a new term lately, time to security. I like that. What is your time to security?
Well, I want to add here something that you guys brought, that it's not only tools. Of course, tools is an important part of that, but we also need to address the people aspect and the processes aspect. So we need to train people to use those tools, and we need to build processes to manage those privileged access. And Gartner says that managing privileged access is impossible without specific tools. So organizations should be able to select tools based on their business requirements to have a tool that is adherent to those requirements. Well, we also talked about.
Sorry, may I add one more thing? I mean, I forgot
Of course, go ahead.
for my list. Great. So I think usability is something you need to really consider, because bad usability is the same as bad security. I mean, there's been some studies. I think Forbes did a study a couple of years ago and said about 40% of millennials were willing to bypass security controls if those controls slowed down their work. And go talk to any IT admin. I mean, you throw a complex PAM system in front of them, say, you got to use this. If that takes away from the job, they will find a way to bypass it. I mean, there's lots of studies about PAM bypass. So it has to be usable to be effective. Otherwise, people don't use it. If people don't use it, it's not secure.
Good point.
There's also a concept. Go ahead, Pablo.
Yeah, sorry, David. But one key point to add is to see a PAM solution as a business enabler, because companies rely on technology to launch new products, to expand their presence global wide, and the security can't be something that break the business speed to grow. Instead, security, good processes, good tools need to help business to grow fast, to be competitive in the market. So to have a good PAN solution very well implemented, very well with a necessary with a good culture already implemented among all the employees and contractors, will help companies to launch more products, to launch more services each time more fast.
That's an excellent point. There was one of the big courier firms, maybe DHL or UPS. They used to have the slogan that we deliver at the speed of business. So I think you need to have security that works at the speed of your business.
Exactly.
Great point.
Excellent point. I think the message is to take out the thought that security brings burden to the user, and that security enables the user and enables the business. Excellent points. Well, we covered during this session the cloud aspect, and we know that organizations are moving their infrastructure to cloud environments. And Mono also mentioned here that most of the organizations use multiple CSPs to get the benefits that cloud brings, like faster application releases, reduced IT costs. However, well, cloud is exposed to the internet and exposed to the world. So protecting those multi-cloud environments against cyber attacks is essential. And it is important to mention that it is a shared responsibility. It's not only the CSP who is responsible to protect the cloud environments. It is also the organizations. And there's a good, Gartner says that 99% of data breaches in cloud environments are the client's responsibility and not the CSPs. And we have many aspects that can be explored by malicious attackers to perform those malicious actions, like misconfigurations, weak credentials, lack of authentications, unpatched vulnerabilities, malicious open source software packages. And to address this problem, uh, organizations need to invest in cloud security, in cloud protection. Gartner predicts that this spending will rise almost 27% year over year, reaching $6.69 billion by the end of 2023. And well, to address those problems, we have lots of cloud-based security solutions. We have CASB, we have KIM, for example, and now I want to cover this specific topic. And well, we here at Senha Segura have developed a KIM solution, a cloud infrastructure entitlements management, in order to protect those cloud environments from those malicious attackers. But well, KIM is a new discipline, it's a new area. So lots of leaders are struggling to understand, okay, what aspects should I consider when choosing a KIM solution to protect my cloud infrastructure? So I want to hear from you guys, from your intakes. What do you guys see as essential capabilities that security leaders should look when choosing for a KIM solution?
Yeah, so for me, when choosing a cloud infrastructure entitlements management solution, look for capabilities that address access risk management and that eliminates excessive permissions. Some of the key capabilities that I look for would be, for example, visibility into permissions and access rights at a granular level and with context. Be able to detect anomalies such as excessive permissions and misconfigurations. Be able to automatically remediate issues and right-size those permissions. And lastly, provide consistency of identities and permissions across multiple cloud environments, to your point, David.
That's a good list, and I would sort of add that while it's not the same thing, KIM is fairly analogous with PAM. I mean, think about again along the lines of least privilege. I mean, especially in cloud environments, there are huge amounts of identities. Most of those identities need very little privileges, but they're probably grossly overprivileged at the moment. So again, take those good PAM principles, apply them. Couple other things that you may want to think. Um, do you want to have yet another application to manage to teach, or should you try and figure out a solution that brings one more thing onto the same pane of glass so that you could have a single pane of glass to look at a number of things? So try and look for platforms that give you a wide variety of functionality instead of, if you're a large organization, if you have a really well-staffed CISO organization, I mean, go for best of breed. You probably have resources to do. You may get slightly better solutions that way, but if you are in any way resource constrained, try and look for a good platform. And I may be biased, but we actually have a pretty nice one. So talk to us.
Nowadays, we have around 15,000 different permissions across the three main CSPs in the market, so AWS, GCP, and Azure. And imagine a developer that is hurrying up to deliver a new functionality, a new portal to the business um to meet their goal. If they will really have time and knowledge about exactly the minimal permission, the least privilege that each component, each service of its system needs to have to access this cloud service. Basically, what they do, they put a lot of permissions, excessive permissions, and when the system start to work, they stop and live in that way. So companies really need a smart system that make that analyze all the identities, all the entitlements, all the logs, and tells to the security leader, look, this identity has 90% more permissions that they really use. So we need to decrease this attack surface that these identities are exposing. So this is the main goal of Keen Solutions, to really create a path, the fastest path to security leaders return to a more secured point in their cloud infrastructure.
Excellent points. Well, now we're heading to the end of this session, and I just want to bring the last topic that we want to cover during the session. Well, we talked about credentials, passwords, but there's passwordless. There's a new approach that eliminates passwords. Well, especially considering that 60% of breaches happen during using stolen credentials. And from an organization perspective, 30% of IT service calls are password resets. So we can understand why users think that passwords bring the burden into them because, well, they have to remember lots of those credentials. And passwords are vulnerable to multiple kinds of attacks. And this really frustrates users and creates a lot of friction and also contributes to what we said before about security being a burden to the user. And to solve, well, at least to try or to solve this problem, the industry has introduced passwordless, which pretty much, well, increases user experience because the user does not have to remember all those passwords, reduces friction. And we've talked also before about behavior about biometrics, which is also like the typing pattern. This is also a type of passwordless as well to authenticate and to ensure that the user is who they really who they say they are. So, but implementing a passwordless approach might sound, well, easy and fast, but it is not. Well, and I want to hear from you guys what uh, information security leaders must consider the aspect that can prevent them to successfully implement a passwordless approach. What should they take into account when implementing passwordless?
Well, first of all, you really need to consider your estate. I mean, if you have very modern estate, if you are cloud native or if you're cloud first, passwordless might be relatively simply doable. If you have lots and lots of legacy estate, lots of Linux machines, Unix machine in a data center, it's actually much trickier proposition. So think about your estate, and in any case, I mean, I think passwordless is the future. I mean, it is truly the future, and it will be beautiful. But kind of the transition is not easy. So make sure that you take care of your existing passwords first. I mean, have them vaulted, have them rotated, have them good enough, and then think about, okay, how do I do the transition into the beautiful, shiny passwordless future? But uh, take care of the basics first. That would be my advice.
Exactly. In our personal life, we use many. We have many examples of passwordless authentication. Like, for instance, your Facebook account or Gmail account to log in many other services. And this is really cool. This decreases a lot the user friction. But there is a point, a problem. There is, if I lose my Gmail account or my Facebook account, attacker can access all my other services. So, because the passwordless approach is good, but the user needs to continue being trained, and the company needs to make all the awareness about security and where will be this main password to the main services. So in this example, Gmail use my biometrical authenticate to biometric information authenticate, etc. But after I was authenticated, the risk increases a lot. So this is the main point to companies take in account.
So what I was saying, David, is I would actually flip the question, invert the question, and take a look at what are some of the aspects that security leaders need to consider that can prevent organizations from actually having a successful implementation of a passwordless approach, right? So I guess it comes down to 4 or 5 different things. The first would be the deployment cost and effort. It can be very, very costly and time consuming. Organizations need to invest in new hardware and software, as well as train their employees on how to use the new system. So that could be a challenge. The second would be security limitations. Passwordless authentication is more secure than traditional password-based authentication, and we know that, but it's not a silver bullet. So you've got to ensure that your passwordless approach is properly configured and maintained, to ensure its effectiveness, and also make sure you're choosing the right approach, right? Because there's lots of different solutions out there that deliver a passwordless authentication approach. Next, people are often very resistant to change. We've talked about this several times throughout this meeting here, but end user skepticism is a real challenge. So organizations need to educate their employees on the benefits of passwordless authentication and provide them with the necessary training and support to ensure that it's a smooth transition, and help them understand the value. What are they getting out of this, right? Because it's uncomfortable for a lot of employees, right? So they're resistant to change, but help them understand what the value is to themselves as well as to the organization. And then, of course, when we talk about legacy systems, passwords are going to continue to exist in older systems and legacy tech. This is what Mono was referring to, which can make it very, very difficult for organizations to fully transition to this type of approach. And of all the different technologies that are out there, I touched on this earlier. My favorite approach to go passwordless is continuous authentication through behavioral biometrics. And there's multiple vendors out there that do a wonderful job. It's like saying a Segura. So we've implemented behavioral biometrics with ours as well, with the keyboard and such. But those would be the top 4 or 5 that I would highly recommend or lift up as to consideration.
Excellent, thank you.
And maybe one additional point is that actually, even though they don't get rid of passwords per se, good PAM system hides a lot of the nastiness from the end user. So they help manage the passwords and take away a lot of the pain.
Well, we still had a lot to cover now here, but we're running out of time. So I want to just take the our this final part of the session, just to give final words. So you're free to leave a message to our audience on the event or anything related to cybersecurity.
Yeah, I guess if since identity is the new perimeter, if I had $1 to spend today, where would I spend it? I would spend it on privileged access management, PASM, cloud infrastructure entitlements management. I think that you'll get the best bang for the buck there for securing the enterprise.
Fully agree. Fully agree.
Yeah, and it's started taking care about the culture and process before thinking on tools, because if you don't do this, the chance of success, a successful implementation will decrease a lot. So culture and good training to your employees and third party contractors is fundamental just to successful deployment.
Excellent points.
And
So
and since this webinar is about kind of the IAM trends at Gartner Summit, I think maybe it's worth reiterating what our friends at Gartner are saying. They are emphasizing the human aspect of cybersecurity. And I don't think any of the security leaders should forget that. It's about the users, it's about the humans. So needs to be human sized, needs to be usable. Otherwise, even the finest technology will not work.
excellent point, Mono. And that's why here at Senha Segura, we are concerned about the customer and this human aspect. So Senha Segura is built in a customer-centric approach and a customer-centric mindset since the conception of the product through through our support. So we think about usability, user experience. Our solution has been evaluated by users at Gartner Peer Insights as having the best usability and user experience in the market. Our service and support is also focused on the user. We have the highest score in support and service and at Gartner Peer Insights. So our open connectors, who were also developed thinking on the customer. So the customer is free to develop connectors themselves. They don't rely on professional services. So Senha Segura is a great fit for organizations who want to address the privileged access management aspect. So those are really good points that we've seen during this session. I want to thank you all for having been part of this session, of bringing in great insights for our audience. And hopefully next year we'll be at the Gartner IAM Summit. I want to thank you all for being part, everybody who watched this presentation today, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you, David.
See
You
you
have
guys.
been
Bye
excellent
bye.
MC as always. Bye.
Thank you, David. Cheers.
Bye bye.
Thank you.